Oliver, great to see you as always. And thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat with me. Let's kick off with something that I think will um, get a few people going. Your platform encourages people to whistleblow. I mean, some people will be happy about that. Quite a lot of people won't. Tell us why people should be why people should be happy about that.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Paul, and to chat with you today. Um, the term whistleblowing has some negative connotations, as you've just alluded to, and recent events in the press where high-profile CEOs have been sacked in the last 24 hours because of whistleblowing reports. It can be seen as a negative for a business, but I think we need to look at the context of whistleblowing in a broader sense. And yes, there are places where whistleblowing is reporting of a significant wrongdoing that sort of it doesn't get much more explosive than the CEO being fired from a whistleblowing report. But most reports around whistleblowing are actually more in the nature of a speak up culture where there's the potential for something going wrong. There are issues bubbling away under the surface that's happening on sites or across an organization, and it's elevating and being aware of those issues before they become this catastrophe that ends up in the most senior person in the company being fired.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the kind of speak up culture is really important to head problems off rather than a tool that you use to sack people if they've misbehaved. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely. And that's reflected if you look at every sector of an organization. And we look at fraud, for example, because there's some new fraud laws that just launched from the 1st of September in the UK. 40% of fraud is identified in an organization because of a tip-off.
Yeah.
Now, without that encouragement for people to speak up and highlight some potential issues of wrongdoing, that would be lost. And that's a significant proportion of fraud being found. So, yeah, it has huge benefits. It's not just this enormous issue that's being reported via whistleblowing. Whistleblowing in sort of lost its context in some ways, but we have to call it whistleblowing because that is the legal term for it. But actually, that speak up culture in an organization is critical for firms to thrive and to survive today.
Yeah. Okay. So given what you've said, I mean, just for the people that are listening that don't know about your business, I mean, just very briefly, tell us a bit about your platform and what you're trying to achieve. I mean, you've kind of covered some of that, I think, but just lay that out for people.
Yeah, sure. So we started about 18 months ago. We're a platform that helps companies and organizations manage the burden of compliance and legislation outside of what I would term as a cyber realm. So cybersecurity aside, the governance and regulations and legislations that are being put on organizations today is becoming greater. And the reason for that is that governments around the world are having budgets squeezed. There's less policing, and therefore, in order to combat the lower resources that they've got to tackle what might call a crime or organizations doing bad things, they are putting more onus on organizations to govern themselves, and therefore regulation is increasing dramatically for organizations to operate. And at the moment, it mainly hits medium to large sized companies, but we're starting to see that trickle down for smaller organizations, especially firms that want to supply to bigger firms or in that supply chain where they demand or they want in order to supply big business. You have to have a modern slavery policy. You have to have sexual harassment. You have to have whistleblowing policy and facilities. So that is being pushed down into small organizations, and it's hard to manage. So we built a platform to augment and support organizations to manage that requirement.
And just again, just for the people that are listening, I mean, just explain very briefly how your platform does that. I mean, how would
Yeah.
that look to me if I was an employee somewhere?
Yeah, sure. So, if you look at first of all, you within our platform, we identify your organization, and the software is clever at looking at what you do and the market you operate in, looking at the SIC codes that are on Companies House, etc. And it ingests lots of data about your firm. So it can intelligently say the size of your organization, the industry that you work in, the clients you provide services to or products, the geographies that you operate in. Here's a list of regulations and laws that you need to adhere to. And then it helps ingest frameworks and regulations that you should be adhering to and breaks them down into actionable tasks, and helps you identify where you are covered. So, what policies you have in place and are they fit for purpose? And then what actions, what training you need to provide, have you done it, that sort of thing, all the way through to, as you alluded to at the start of the call, that we provide a whistleblowing facility or speak up culture, because that covers a lot of requirements around listening to people within your organization. So it's really designed to handhold organizations to be able to navigate what is a really complex web of compliance requirements.
Sure. Okay. So let's just talk about the journey that you're on. I mean, you're building the business as we speak, if you like. I mean,
Mhm.
give us a sense of the direction of travel. I mean, where in terms of impact, where do you want to get to?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, like any good entrepreneur, we want to, aiming to hit the stars with the organization that we've started. We are early stage, so we originally started out working within accountancy software. So using that as an analysis platform to extract extract any potential areas of fraud, looking at data within a platform around supply chain, looking at transaction types, etc., to build a picture of the organization and support them from a mostly fraud prevention perspective. We focused on that for the first 8 to 10 months of the company, but found that it was very niche, and actually the markets we were aiming at, that sort of SME market, the concerns around fraud were fairly limited because they felt that they had a handle on everything that was happening in their organization, which arguably actually isn't the case. Well, the stats suggest it's not the case, but that's sort of the sales barriers were against somebody thinking that they know everything. And you don't tend to put a burglar alarm in your house until you've been burgled. So that's sort of where we felt that we were coming up against restrictions and limitations on what the service we were providing. So we took a slight strategic change and broadened the service offering. And instead of having that sort of carrot approach to sales, we moved to the stick approach, where actually, if you want to operate in this geography, or you're this particular size, or you want to operate in biosciences or in gambling or whatever sector you're in, you actually have to have this type of regulation and have to have these measures in place in order to operate in this arena. So we move towards the stick, where we're not selling against as a nice to have. We can give you more visibility. We're selling you a service that if you don't have it, you have a risk of being shut down by the regulator of your industry.
Sure. Okay. And it's interesting that you mentioned that shift from stick to carrot. One of the things that interests me about the job of the CEO is how you work out when to do those sorts of things. I mean, how do you cut through all the noise? I mean, because there's 101 things you could do every day. I mean, how do you cut through the noise and work out the kind of the things that you need to prioritize, and focus on? How do you do that? What's your take on that?
Um, so first and foremost, you've got to listen to what your clients are saying and what your customers are saying. And as a CEO, it's really important to do that in the early days. And that feedback, it can't be taken in isolation, okay? And you've got to look at the feedback and extrapolate what that looks like, at scale. And I believe any business with enough hard graft can succeed to a certain level, right? You can if you're dogmatic and you've got the persistence to really drive something forward, you can make a business out of almost anything.
Mm.
But how big will that business be? And how successful will it be is another matter. Now, it's very difficult when you start out to know what your addressable market size is, and but you can get feedback from that on quite early stage when you're seeing what type of pushback you're getting and why you're getting that pushback. And I think there's two trains of thought that someone that CEO can go through. Either you stick by your guns and you say, no, we're going to plow on whatever happens because I have this strong vision that's contrary to what people are telling me, and you just plow ahead. Or you listen, you digest the feedback, and you take an educated guess in truth to say that actually let's pivot slightly and let's go to a market that we're being pushed towards or pulled towards, even better, which we were in this case, being pulled towards a specific market because they weren't being serviced by the current providers.
Yeah. And in terms of how you do that, I mean, what's your view about how you bring your leadership team on board with that? Because my experience, I mean, the leadership teams I've with, they're full of people that are pretty determined, people that,
Mm.
generally don't give up on things very easily. I mean, and what's
Yeah.
your thoughts on how how do you persuade them to make that shift? I mean, what's your experience of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in startup world, it should be transparent across everybody on what's going on and what pushback and feedback you're getting. So there shouldn't be a great reveal in a monthly board meeting to say, oh, we're now going to pivot here and start doing this instead of that. If it's got to that stage, and then there's been some failures along the way about how you communicate. So, we're still a fairly small business. We speak every day, well, pretty much every day, certainly with my fellow directors, and we're on that journey together.
Mm.
I think when you get slightly bigger, and I've had this in the past, what you want to avoid is that shock moment of, oh, really, I didn't realize that was even on
Yeah.
the cards to pivot. And that might happen with investors or stakeholders in the organization that aren't in the day to day. But I think communication, like anything, is so important. And sadly, it's one of the first things that goes when you get busy is actually communicating. So being able to take people on that journey with you is really important, and making sure that that feedback is shared constantly. And I'm always pinging emails around to people with feedback from customers, good and bad, so that we are constantly getting exposed to what's happening within the ecosystem that we operate.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting the point you make about communication. I mean, we'll come back to that in a bit, I think. But let me ask you another question about being the CEO. I mean, I talk to a lot of CEOs. I mean, the consensus is that it's a bit like riding a roller coaster. I mean, you have good days, you have bad days, and you have everything in between, which makes it emotionally pretty draining. Was certainly was my experience. I mean, what is it about this particular mission that the thing that you're trying to achieve? What is it that makes you kind of bounce out of bed every morning to get stuck into building the business? I mean, what is that? What is the motivation for you?
That's a good question. I mean, running a company is brutal,
Yeah.
and it is all about persistence, and you've got to celebrate the highs as much as the lows. And it is tough. So how do you get through that? So for me, first and foremost, I work with people I like. So you have to have a team around you. Yes, they need to be able to do the job. You've got to have faith in them that they are the best that you can afford or the best that you found for doing a particular role that you hired them for. That's sort of a given. But and that's expected of any interview process. So I'd hope that would be how we would recruit. But you've got to like people. You've got to get on with them because at this stage, in an early stage in a business, um, you're all in this together, and it's tough, and you've got to have that camaraderie to work together. And that's one of the things post COVID that's been tough is you're not in the same office together. I mean, I've had companies pre-COVID where we were in an office together 5 days a week, and we now only get together really twice a week. The rest of the time is on video, but even that twice a week, it's so vital to have that, to be together, to share the journey with people. The other motivation for me is I've seen the devastating consequences of things that go wrong when someone doesn't speak up. So when a fraud is happening in an organization that's not reported on, yet it's been known about, but people have been afraid to report it because that person is more senior than them and they're worried about backlash against them. I found that that can be catastrophic for someone's mental health and career even, and then the impact of the business actually again can be huge. And I've seen companies go out of business
Mm.
because they lost money to a finance director who's siphoning off
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I just hate that injustice, and I feel like the systems that are in place either don't exist or are archaic, and there's got to be a better way to fix that. Um, and then the third part for me is having run companies, I have been faced with working through regulations and compliance. I had a temporary staffing platform where we had thousands of people out working every day, and the the regulations around hiring people working in different sectors, where they have a gang master's license, which is when people handling food like fruit pickers and working in food production places, working through the government frameworks to get those accreditations when you're running a small business and you don't have anyone dedicated to you. It normally falls on the shoulder of your operations manager or HR manager, but they're no expert in it, and it's a real pain to unpick it. And they're not the most user friendly frameworks. So um, I felt that if we can do something that streamlines that for companies and makes it easier, I would use it. And therefore, I expect lots of other people would as well. So those sort of three things combined around the team, the pain point when things go wrong, and also the pain when you're trying to do things right, are motivations for me to actually get up and want to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I can see why that would motivate you. Let me just pick up one point. The speak up culture. I mean,
Mm,
how do you make that happen within your own organization? How do you know that you've got that culture in place?
yeah. So we're quite a flat hierarchy. It's uh, okay. I'm not gonna. I don't want to contradict myself here, but we are a small company. There's about 12 people involved in the organization. Um, but we we are. I mean, we run our own facility, so we have our own platform, obviously operating for ourselves. Um, we're a very flat organization, so um, people have direct access to me. I know everybody's name. We have regular socials. There's no distance between our most junior person and me in the organization. So I'd like to feel that if there was an issue, they would come to me with it, or feel comfortable to be able to come to me if their line manager couldn't help in the first instance. Um, I think we regularly share news stories where there hasn't been a good speak up culture and things have gone wrong, of which they seem to be on a weekly basis. We mentioned the CEO of the
Yeah.
large boutique companies at the start of this. You see celebrities on cooking programs that
Mhm.
are doing things wrong, but people didn't feel that they could speak up because they were freelancers or they were junior or runners in the production company, etc. Um, but we share stories about that, about this is what we don't want to be. This is why we're here. This is why we exist, to protect these people. So with that culture within our organization, I feel like we're well covered in terms of people feeling very happy to speak up and share any issues that they see.
No, I'm sure. I get that. I get that. Let's just move on to, you touched about communicating with stakeholders outside of the business. We've talked about internals. And I mean, what's your take on the best way of communicating about this with external stakeholders? I mean, we talked earlier on about how the fact that some people aren't necessarily, they have negative connotations to some of this. I mean, what have you learned about communicating with external stakeholders externally?
What regarding a speak up culture, you mean?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
so when I never forget, I was at a conference and there was a PR chap of a large PR organization giving a talk, and it was quite early on in Twitter days. And he was talking about the rise of social media. So you can sort of you can frame where that timeline is. And he was talking about the emerging trends of people using Twitter. And he said previously there's not really been a facility for people to speak to people within their organization at a high level if they're on the shop floor, as it were. And he gave this example of a mining company whereby someone in the mine in Africa uh, was on Twitter and he tweeted at the CEO to say that his friend had died in the mine that day. What were you going to do about it? And that is a obviously rather public, but a brilliant way for somebody that wouldn't a story and an issue that wouldn't necessarily have got straight to the CEO, albeit quite an extreme case, but it's a good example of where technology can be used to get a message straight to the highest level within an organization of something that is incredibly important and obviously critical to look into. Um, but that was done in a public format. So then, therefore, that became a news story very, very quickly.
mm,
Now, if that facility isn't within a private environment, those issues can't be investigated properly. And I'm not advocating for hiding things from the public, but having control of issues, being able to identify them early and investigate them is really important. And
yeah,
bringing the issue to life for external stakeholders and shareholders within an organization of why it's important to create this speak up culture. Real life examples like that go a long way to say, okay, what was the impact of that? Okay, well, it's enormous negative publicity. It's shareholders speaking up, wanting to know what safety policies are, what's in place, and actually share price dipping.
mm,
And those things really matter. And
yeah,
now, obviously, the death of an employee is first and foremost, but often shareholders react just as well to a dip in share price.
yeah.
So it's important that that's given context.
I mean, it's interesting you described that example. I mean, when you were talking about that, I mean, obviously that's actually quite a shocking example that a member of staff had to communicate with the CEO via Twitter. That really tells you that they haven't got the sorts of things that they need internally that they really should have. And I certainly hope that on the companies that I've been on the boards of, that if any of the members of staff had died, I'd like to have known about it. I mean, that's for certain. I mean, I'm pretty sure they didn't. I wasn't in that kind of high risk game, but it's quite a striking example you give there. Uh, and let's just turn now to the kind of people that you need to make all this stuff happen. I mean, what's your view? I mean, you're still relatively small. What's your view about getting the right people on the bus, if you like? What sort of people do you look for?
Yeah. So I'm quite fortunate. My co-founder, I've started a company with in the past, and we've sold it together. So I've been on the journey with him once before. So we know each other very well, and we're both battle tested in the organization. Um, I think for early organizations, so what do I look for? So I look for people that are doers, that have resilience, that are willing to want to learn, that want to they wouldn't treat this as a job as such. They treat it as a life decision to join an early stage business because it's much more than a job. You're on a journey with people. Um, I think there's a common mistake that um, early stage companies make by hiring somebody who's worked at a big brand before. So someone who's worked in, at Google or Just Eat or big organizations where they think, oh, CV, they were here at this big organization, so they must be good. But in fact, from my experience, quite often people that come from bigger companies have done a much smaller part of what you might need them to do in a startup. And certainly for anyone in the sales team, selling a startup that nobody's heard of and you don't have a brand is very different to fielding inbound calls when someone's trying to buy advertising from you as Meta. So I think don't get sucked into the glitz and glamour of hiring because a CV has a well-known name on it. I think understand understand the role you're looking to fill, and perhaps look at hiring as a slightly at a slightly different angle. So I love hiring recruiters as salespeople because they've got thick skin. They're on the phone. They know the value of relationships. And quite often they may not be an expert in, well, certainly not an expert in a compliance platform, but they understand the sales cycle and the rigor and the
Yeah.
lead management. And I think looking at that when you're hiring for different people across your organizations is really quite important.
Yeah. And the thing that flows on from that is the thing that interests me is how you then create a culture that enables people to perform effectively. I mean, what's your view of that process?
Yeah. So I've always tried to build a culture of ownership, and that's ownership of what have been hired to do. So um, I expect people to be able to own and manage what they've been brought in to do, and think with some level of autonomy around what they're getting on with and how they're operating, and also feel like they own the impact of what they do across the organization. I've always been very open with my teams about the organization, our strategy, our financials, our performance. Sometimes that's quite scary when you're burning cash and you're going through a period of growth where you're sharing a negative P&L. It can be scary to people, but I believe if they are on board with you and they see that and they understand the context, then they'll understand what needs to be done in order to make a negative balance sheet into a positive balance sheet. Um, Even when I've sold companies in the past, I've been very open with everybody about the buying process, the sales process, or the buying process that we were going through, and making everyone aware of what's happening. So I think making people feel like they have a direct impact and own part of the journey that we're on has been really important as well.
Yeah, no, I get the logic of that. In terms of building your particular business, I mean, what would you say are the particular distinctive capabilities that you have? I mean, I'm thinking about what are the things that give you a competitive edge? I mean, we spoke earlier on about the fact that you're not in and you're not in blue water, as it were. You're in red water. I mean, what's your take on building those kind of competitive, distinctive capabilities? I mean, how are you doing that? Just talk us through that.
Yeah, so I think one of our first advantages, and it's circumstantial really, is that we've developed the product within the last 18 months.
Mm.
Um, so the technology that we've got is cutting edge, if that's the right expression. Um, Whereas the market is fairly mature, certainly for the enterprise world, but the products and the services that they provide, I believe, aren't fit for purpose. So, we've grown up with this business very much on the wave of AI, being able to develop using AI, being able to integrate AI into the platform. So our capability and analysis is far faster and better than the more legacy platforms that have tried to shoehorn capability into their existing monolith of code base. So first of all, really just fortuitous timing going to the market now. Second of all, I mentioned it. I think where incumbents are comfortable, they haven't necessarily innovated. And the way in which as I mentioned, our platform does other things, but if we focus on the speak up element of the platform for now, quite often you're looking at an enterprise website and their whistleblowing or speak up facility is an online form or a phone number.
Mm.
But actually, if you're working on the factory floor or in a warehouse or in a busy restaurant, you're not going to be surfing the company website to find a whistleblowing link in the footer of the website on your mobile phone. So we focused heavily and have sat in and have visited sites where we see the people that we want to get their feedback from. Where do they go? What do they look at? What are they doing? On their coffee break, they're on their phone in the staff cafeteria, right? What needs to be on the wall, right? QR code, because that takes them through to a nice, really easy to use web app. Do we want to have an app they need to download to their phones? No, because some people don't have smartphones. Some people don't have enough data to download an app. So what's the quickest way we can facilitate a report? Can we facilitate a report from a text line? Yes. Can we make it free text? Free SMS, that sort of thing. So there's, I think we've had the luxury of being able to build the platform at the right time, but also utilize the modern tech that we have to at our fingertips in order to craft a solution that's actually more aligned with the way that the bulk of users are using technology today.
Yeah. So what you're really saying is you're right at the cutting edge because legacy systems don't necessarily have that thinking in place, do they?
Yeah, and it's hard to shoehorn it in to an existing platform. So I mean, you look at the way we triage reports. Big organizations will get hundreds of reports a month of ranging from my manager is annoying me. Okay, that's not a whistleblowing problem, but it needs to be triaged and at least looked at, right, all the way through to we don't have the right health and safety equipment on site here, and we haven't had it for 3 months.
Mm.
Um, but looking at those and determining what is a false positive or a real case is time consuming. So we're able to use AI in order to analyze the issues being reported and to do that first line of triage.
Mm.
Um,
Presumably
and
much quicker.
yeah, instantly. And so it reduces the noise. So some of the pushback we get, and again, this comes back to your point at the very start, is do people really want to know? Do they want a whistleblowing facility? Do they want to know? Part of that reason why they don't is because they don't want more work to have to sift through and reports that aren't relevant. But technology can help with that and can reduce that noise.
Yeah, and you've just sort of talked about the feedback you get from customers. But what does a good customer look like to you? I can see that some customers would think, well, this is just going to create a whole load of work for me, and I don't really want that. I totally get that. What would a good customer look like to you?
Yeah. Um, so with larger organizations in the enterprise world, they tend to have teams of people managing this problem. So they have a head of compliance, and maybe a team of two or three people that sits under that person to support them. Um, and a lot of the streamlining work that we do will help them, but it's not really my focus. A good customer for me is somebody that that sees compliance as a headache, as a burden on them. They don't have a dedicated resource for it. So it's normally an HR manager, potentially a CFO or a general counsel if they're big enough to have an in-house legal team that is doing this role alongside their day job. And for me, that's where the most benefit comes in, where, okay, you can almost have a virtual compliance officer with Continual because we are able to take away that burden from you and only elevate the stuff that you really need to get involved in. And in terms of organization type, the culture of the organization for me needs to be one where we are we are enacting a change in their company, right? We're not just putting in a platform and then walking away. We're helping them roll out QR codes in cafeterias. We're looking at how do we proactively engage your workforce so that they will feel like they can speak up. Clever ways of doing that. It's printing things on devices that they use daily. So if there's particular trolleys or whatever equipment they might be using in a warehouse, is having some advertising on that so that they're aware of where they need to report any wrongdoing. Similarly, the system will prompt for feedback at pertinent times. So where a company has a CRM system, when a deal goes through to proposal being submitted, it'll ping those people at that point to say, just making sure you don't have a conflict of interest with this new client, or do you have a prior relationship with them, so that they can report it and it's a timely one rather than once a year. So it's got to be organizations that understand the benefit of that continual feedback from their employee base.
It sounds to me like it's something that they could do within Parliament, actually, but perhaps an aside. Let me just pick up that point there. I mean, notwithstanding, Parliament and the issues around compliance there. I mean, what's your take on building? I mean, my view is that building relationships with customers pretty important. If you haven't got customers, you haven't got a business. But it's very easy to say build a good relationship with customers. It's much more difficult to do, particularly if it's intermediated by technology. I mean, what's your take on that relationship building process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Paul. So we come up against this fairly regularly, right? We've got two ways of our go to market. One of them is a product led growth. So where customers can find us on a Google search, they can set up their own account and they can start using us relatively easily, right? And they'll pay a small subscription price for the software. We could go down that route. We haven't gone down that route. We are more of a consultative sell because we don't want to just be a platform where I think a lot of software companies will sell their software tools, and the capability of that software is only utilized by about 10%. And there's some staggering stat that I've heard about 12 months ago from Microsoft that said, I forget what the numbers are, but say it's something like 10 billion security products that were sold last year, but customers only switched on 2 billion worth.
Wow, really? That's expensive.
Yeah, and I think that's common across a lot of software vendors where customers will pay for things that they don't use, and I'm really against that. I think in order to support your customers, you need to be more than just a software platform. You need to provide real value about how do they actually utilize this and roll it out across their organization. And that's where the relationship comes in. So we may get inquiries through the website and inbound, but actually then the consultation process starts to find out, do they fit the kind of client that would benefit most from what we're doing? What are their problems? And then guide them through that. And a sales, nobody likes being sold to, right? And the term sales is a bit like whistleblowing, right? It's become slightly dirty, a bit muddied because nobody wants to be sold to. But sales really is understanding what the client's problem is, and then looking at whether your solution is a solution that's right for them. You shouldn't be diving into a product demo from the get-go. You should be understanding what the client's issues are and then looking to solve them.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. You touched a minute ago on kind of go to market. I mean, I just want to move to talk about new markets, different jurisdictions. I mean, what's your take on kind of market entry? I mean, doing business in New York, very different from doing business in London or Singapore or whatever. I mean, what's your take on going into new jurisdictions, working with partners in different parts of the world, different countries?
Yeah, Uh, so if you'd asked me the same question 5 years ago, I would have said stick to one market, don't expand too quickly. Um, Work within a culture and a market that you really understand. But what we found in in the last 18 months, 2 years, is that almost every company that we on board either has a footprint overseas or they have a client base that's overseas, which immediately means that their exposure to compliance requirements globally is there from the first day,
Mm.
and therefore our product and service needs to be there from the first day. So from a client perspective, I think there's two elements to this. One of them is where's your sales focus,
Mm.
and I think it's sensible to work geography by geography and um, research very, very carefully about which geographies you want to approach first. And I've done quite a lot of international expansion in previous roles. And obviously, there's always the draw of the USA, but actually, it is such a difficult market to penetrate that it should be one of the last ones that you approach. But then similarly, if you want to expand into France or Germany, there's barriers, there's cultural barriers, there's resistance if you're not a French business, for example. Yeah, there's cultural challenges. So, but if you can expand via your client base, so the service delivery of clients that you are providing service to have international footprints, which most will of a certain size, certainly most mid-sized organizations and above, then you can expand into new geographies by stealth almost, by selling um, selling on the basis that you've already got clients in that region because your clients are geographically dispersed.
And as you've picked up more clients that are of that category where they've got clients in multiple jurisdictions, I mean, would you say the business has evolved as you've expanded globally?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's evolved in different ways. I expect some things I expected to be really difficult have been actually quite easy, and some things that have been that I thought would be easier have been quite difficult.
Give us
So
an example of each of those. Give us an example of something that was easy and something that was difficult.
yeah, with Continual, my current business, we provide third party risk management. So where an organization's supply chain, we look at the supply chain within that organization and look at governance and ethics and compliance risks within your supply chain. And one of the checks that we do, one of the many checks, is we'll look at that business, that registered entity and the associated people and entities within that network to see if it operates in any sanctioned geographies, or if it's got ownership of a director who's been struck off, or anything that might be a risk for that particular entity. Now, a lot of our clients will buy product either directly or indirectly from China, and we thought, well, trying to evaluate an entity in China will be nigh on impossible using technology. But actually, when we dug into it, um, it's Chinese law that the organizations have to have the equivalent of a company registered number on their website that you can reference and look up and see very clearly the details of that organization. And so actually that was much easier for us to do those checks for Chinese organizations, whereas looking at organizations in Australia is much harder because that information is behind a paywall and you've got to pay $25 per lookup or whatever it is, which can be quite expensive if you're looking up thousands of companies within one client's supply chain. So, in the countries that you think maybe difficult can often be easier than you think for various reasons. And then an example where it was harder than I thought, well, that's again actually was Australia. So I had an organization which was a platform for blue collar workers to find short-term employment and for organizations to hire a large-scale a temporary workforce. And we grew successfully in the UK, and we expanded into Australia, thinking that it was a nice, neat mix. It was the same, similar culture, same language, etc. But actually, once we started getting into it and looking at the types of work we were offering, and the types of jobs people were undertaking, and we started working with local councils out there and the government. We found that the complexities around employment law in Australia is really complex. So
Right.
for example, if someone's doing a shift and their shift straddles a particular time of the day. So if it goes beyond 6 p.m., the minimum wage changes from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Or if the temperature rises above a certain threshold and you're outside doing manual labor, or you're working in doing roadworks or whatever, and the temperature goes above a particular point, then your shift should be paid a different rate as well. And also, there's different rates across um, different territories within Australia. That quite often somebody might live in use the term as one council, for example, but work in a different council. But then they do some shifts in one council and some shifts in another different geography. Then the complexities around how to run payroll in that country were really hard to get your head
Yeah,
around,
sure.
and required much more development investment than we had initially planned for.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because I think one of the things that makes business interesting is, I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience has been there's always things that kind of pop up that just confound your expectations,
Yeah.
which is partly what makes it interesting. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think well, my experience is you don't get bored if you're an entrepreneur.
No,
You
no,
know,
you
not,
definitely
not
don't get
sat
that.
around thinking, oh God, I'm fed up with doing this. It's the same old thing every day. It doesn't really kind of work that way, I don't think, in
Mhm.
this context. Let's turn to what you've learned from your experiences. I mean, just briefly, your biggest mistake. I mean, give us a flavour of the biggest thing that you screwed up, and what did you learn from it?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's been so many. Where do I start? Um, my biggest mistake. Okay, yeah, I think as a fast-growing business, time is obviously of the essence,
Mm.
and hiring the right people, as we've talked about, is vital for success. I think where I've made mistakes in the past, if I've hired the wrong person, I've stuck with them for longer than I should have done,
Yeah, I've made that same
because
mistake.
of the hassle of going through the recruitment cycle again, because it's it's it takes a long time to recruit, and if you get it wrong, it takes even longer to get rid of them and then to start again and go through that whole
And it's a
process.
lot of
So
work as well, isn't it? I mean,
it's a lot of work. Even if you've got a dedicated team,
yeah,
it's still a lot of work. And I've definitely been guilty of hoping someone's going to change, and helping them. But if you know it's wrong, then it's wrong. So
yeah,
act decisively, act swiftly. I know it's painful, but it's short-term pain
yeah.
as opposed to what longer-term pain that person might cause. So I guess my biggest mistake is not doing that, which is strange because I can be quite ruthless. I'm not a shrinking violet, but that camaraderie can cloud your judgment, where you like somebody, but actually they're crap at that job. That you shouldn't hold on to them. You need to be.
No, I totally get that. And I mean, you're very successful now. I mean, what would you attribute your success to? And let's talk about the flip side to making mistakes, which all entrepreneurs talk about, the numbers
Yeah.
of mistakes they make. I mean, what would you attribute your success to?
Um, I think there's a couple of qualities that people who have a degree of success generally have. And one of them is persistence,
Yeah,
um, and um, not giving up at the first hurdle is vital when growing a business. I think um, uh, I think it's very easy to crumble under the pressure, but you've got to fight through it and continue and be
Yeah.
strong around about it and push through. Um, I think developing a thick skin, and I certainly didn't have this at the start. Um, I remember my first company. I was only 25, I think, at the time. I remember we had a little tiny little shoebox cupboard office in Soho that a mate of mine gave us, and there was about six of us, I think, crammed in this little office. And I could walk home from there across Waterloo Bridge to get to the train from Waterloo to get home every night. And I remember crying walking along Waterloo Bridge every night because how horrible it was trying
Yeah.
to get this business going. Um, and that can either make or break you. And luckily, it made me because now I- I'll put up with anything and I'll fight through anything because I've have been rejected so many times that it's water off a duck's back now. But when you're first starting out, you take it so personally. A client, what do you mean a client doesn't want to talk to me about my fabulous product that I've just built? Well, of course they don't because they've had 20 other approaches that day, and you're just a name they don't recognize, etc. And it's very easy to become disheartened. But you've got to have that thick skin, and that can't happen overnight. That skin is a callus that's been picked away at for years,
Yeah.
and eventually you end up like an armadillo, and you can power through it.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I like the Churchill quote, where he said, "Success is going from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm," which I really like, and I feel that, I certainly I reflect on that when I'm struggling with things. Um, in terms of the success, I mean, what would you say the achievements are that you're most proud of? I mean, I know you've achieved lots of things, but if you look back, what are the top two or three things that you're most proud of?
I mean, putting my family aside, so work in a work context. Uh, there, I think when I sold a company in 2015, um, and I took everyone out for a big lunch when the contract was signed, which turned into dinner. And just looking around the table at the people that were employed by the business and recognizing that everyone was there at the start. And okay, we'd lost a couple of people, but the management team of the organization had been with me, I think it was 5 years or so, through that journey together, and we've made it through. Um, and I felt a real sense of achievement that we had started together and we'd finished together. And obviously, we had enormous ups and downs and arguments, fights and tears and tantrums and all sorts. But actually, we got to the sale, which was always our objective, and it felt amazing. And being able to do that and share that moment with everybody that was with us at the start was a really nice
And
achievement.
those relationships are often very powerful, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the guys I'm obviously in business with now, so and I still speak to everybody, and it's a good it's a lovely feeling.
Yeah. And a couple of sort of final questions. I mean, if you were to give one piece of advice to a rookie CEO, other than don't listen to old timers, apart from that, I mean, what
Well,
advice would you give to a rookie?
I
So,
mean, I've run businesses for the last maybe 15 years in one way or another, and I still think of myself as a rookie CEO.
right.
And nobody knows really what they're doing.
Yeah.
We like to think we do, but the reality is we don't. I think don't be intimidated by people because they've been in a role for a long time or they are in a big organization. If you're running a company, the responsibility is as much on your shoulders running a company of two or three people as it is the same responsibility of somebody who's running a company of 2 or 3 thousand people. You still are responsible for payroll. You still are responsible for making sure people are comfortable, are happy, are motivated, albeit you may be on a much smaller scale. What you're doing is no less important than somebody who's doing it at a large scale. And so don't be intimidated by somebody who you think is the oracle and has knows everything and is hugely successful because starting out as a CEO, you still have that level of responsibility, and you're still it's a level playing field, I think, is my
I mean,
main
it's
point.
interesting your point about people not knowing what they're doing. I mean, I think you see that there is no one sort of formula, there is no one playbook for building a global business. I mean, each business has to do it its own way because otherwise you won't have, if you're copying other people, you don't have a competitive edge. So, and the job of the CEO is to work out what the right route is for that business, and every business is different, so I have a slightly different view to you. I don't think people don't, it's not that people don't know what they're doing. I think people have to do things in very different ways, will be my
Yeah.
take. But it's certainly an interesting experience. One last thing that is not so much about your business but about the situation. I mean, all the talk at the moment is about AI. You're deploying AI very actively within your proposition. I mean, what's your thoughts on the way AI is going to change your world in the next few years?
Um, that's a good question. I think there's a saying that goes that we with technical development we overestimate the the impact it'll have in 12 months, but underestimate the impact it'll have in 10 years. Um, I think where we are, there's obviously been a bubble. I think we're in a bubble. I think it's gonna the money that's pouring in will dry up somewhat, and there'll be some realignment in terms of valuations. You look at the big players like OpenAI, they are in the news all the time, right? The publicity they get is astronomical, and therefore everyone is using their product because they read about it all the time. Um, if we had that level of PR coverage for my organization, I could say now we would be much bigger. So it's a bit of a folly to look at some of these AI players and the dominance in terms of the usage that they have across the globe. Because I think it just by the nature of people talking about them in the press and the coverage they get is enough to fuel people to try them out. I think there'll be a rebalancing in terms of what is actually useful and what's just noise. We're still finding our feet in the tech world around what can AI actually do to help you develop software, for example. And it's a real mixed bag, right? We would never use AI to be let loose to develop any functionality within our platform, but we would use it to augment or run test scripts or support a developer in terms of writing code and reviewing code. So it's useful, but it's only useful by about 10% of what it's being talked about, how useful it's going to be in the current landscape. Um, how it impacts us in the longer term, I don't know. I think there are far cleverer people out there that have a vision of where this is going to go. But I think we need to be alert to it and alert to what's next. There's a lot of talk about that parity of intelligence, that cognitive aspect of AI, how that's coming online soon. I think we just need to be mindful of what that means, and how we protect ourselves. I mean, I live in a farmhouse renovated, and I didn't have any technology put in the house at all. So nothing controls my lights apart from light switches. I have a very simple rudimentary music system because I just don't trust the way that it might go in the future. But then, you buy a new car, you can't help but get a computer system in it. So it is being forced on us, but I think there's some unknowns about what will happen in the future.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very well made point. I mean, either way, I think it's going to be an interesting few years. So, a good point you've made there. So, Oliver, thank you for sharing that story. Absolutely fascinating. And one last thing, if people want to get hold of you, how should they contact you?
Um, well, my pleasure, Paul. It's been great to speak with you. Just look me up on LinkedIn, Oliver Crofton at Continual. You can connect with me. Feel free to reach out, ask me any questions if you're looking for advice or anything. If you're starting a business or you're an established company and you want to kick the tires on any issues, I'm very open to discussing business matters and sharing insights and ideas. So yeah, please reach out on LinkedIn.
Many thanks. Oliver, good to see you. See you again soon.
My pleasure, Paul. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye.